Hey everybody, happy Tutorial Thursday. We are happy to be back in the swing of our Thursday tutorials here on the Beading Dreams stream. We've got a pretty simple one. Everyone's happy, yay! We've got a pretty simple one for you today to kind of, again, ease back into 2 tutorials. On Thursday, it's this one, I'm calling it Peas in a Pod Bracelet. It's a pretty basic construction technique, and once again, like a lot of things that we've done on the Beading Dreams stream, you know, this technique is applicable across a wide variety of... Hi Sophia! Well, we missed you on the stream, but you know what? You didn't miss a whole lot, because I am still dealing with lingering fatigue from COVID, and it is severely impacting my ability to focus. So I wandered through last night's stream, told lots of stories, and I think showed a grand total of 5 different kinds of beads. So you didn't miss a whole lot unless you were looking for story time with Allison and Heather last night. But I am working to get back up to full speed, and hopefully we'll have some a more focused and bead-full sales stream on Saturday. That's the tough thing, is I am feeling better, but then like things like the cumulative fatigue will just like hit me, and all of a sudden I'll be like, wow, I've been talking about random nothingness for the past 30 minutes instead of focusing on what I'm supposed to be doing. So there are some kind of lingering effects. Also, Elton escaped to the backyard this morning, and I spent like 20 minutes chasing him around trying to get him back in the house, and after which I had to solidly sit down for like 15 minutes because I was completely winded. So let's talk tools and supplies for this afternoon's tutorial. Like I said, it's a pretty simple one. We should have you back to your regularly scheduled daytime lives slightly before 1 p.m. today. We are going to need some chain. Doesn't really matter what size it is, it just needs to be big enough to fit the wire that you are using for this project. So for my project today, I'm going to be using some 22 gauge gold-filled wire. So I just need to make sure that whatever my... Hi Dogsy, welcome, welcome. I know, it's so hard. I'm so bad at taking it easy. It's not a life skill that I ever acquired. So thank you for the advice. Right. Noted. Yuck. Yuck. Don't like it. Okay, so 22 gauge wire is what I'm going to use for today's tutorial, which means that I need a chain that will accommodate 22 gauge wire. This little bronze one should be just fine. I'm going to need a clasp. I'm going to use this toggle clasp, which admittedly might be a little large for this chain, but we're just going to go with it at this point because that's what I grabbed. And then I'm going to need beads. So how many beads you use for your little peas in a pod is totally up to you. This is a symbology that has a lot of meaning for some people. Like sometimes it means parents and children. Sometimes it means parents and you know, anticipated child. You know, so you can do this technique with however many beads you want. So it can be 1, 2, 3, 7. Take your pick. I'm going to go ahead and use 3 today because that's what I did in my sample. And I'm going to use 6mm beads. So I have my little dish of 6mm beads, and I'm just going to take a minute and find, let's see, alright, looks like we've got some rose quartz. I've got 3 6mm rose quartz beads, and that's what I'm going to... Absolutely, Dogsy. Go ahead and whisper Heather, and I will, HK Adams, and I will let her know to look for your whisper, and we would be so very happy to be your Christmas elves. Thank you so much for thinking of us. Okay, so as far as tools, you're just going to need your basics. You're going to need your round nose and your chain nose and your wire cutters. So I'm going to start by taking my 22 gauge wire. I'm going to cut a fairly short piece. I'm going to cut a piece of my 20, did I say 24 or 22? 24 would also work. It just kind of depends on what your beads will accommodate and what your chain will accommodate. Hail yes! Always. Okay, so I'm going to cut a piece of this 22 gauge wire that's about nominally 3.5, 4 inches long. I did not measure that. As you can see, I just eyeballed it. And I'm going to take my chain and I'm going to cut my chain in half. Now, how much chain do you need for this project? Because I didn't really address that. I just said you need some chain. So let's talk for just a second about average length of a bracelet for a woman is 7 inches. So if you're gonna, hold on, I need to corral my rose quartz beads or they're gonna go running away. There, now they have a little vessel. Okay, so your average length bracelet for a woman is 7 inches long. So when you're trying to calculate your chain length, you need to take a couple things into account. First of all is the length of your clasp, okay? Because you need to account for that when you're cutting your chain, because if you cut, say, 7 inches of chain, then you add a 1 inch long clasp to it, then all of a sudden you've got an 8 inch bracelet, which is going to fit some people just fine, but it's going to be too big for some folks. The second thing you have to account for is the center section that you're going to be doing, how long that's going to be. And since I don't 100% know how long that's going to be, if I'm using an inexpensive chain, what I like to do is I like to cut pieces that are a little overly long. So I figure if I'm going to make a 7 inch bracelet, I'm definitely not going to need more than 3.5 inches of chain on each side. I'm going to wind up needing less than that. But if I'm using an inexpensive chain, I'll just cut myself to 3.5 inch pieces and then trim the remainder at the end. So that's my method of dealing with this. And you could make yourself a sample like I've done and then measure that. The problem here is I think my rose quartz are slightly bigger. Yeah, they are. See, my beads that I'm using today are slightly bigger than the beads I used on my sample. So if I were to measure this, it would give me an approximation, but not an actual accurate measurement. So you're going to be approximate one way or the other, I think is pretty much what I'm trying to say here. So now I'm going to go ahead and take this 4 inch piece of 22 gauge wire that I have cut, and I'm going to make a basic wire wrap loop at the end of it that I'm going to link onto one side of my chain. So for anyone who's been hanging out here on the Beading Dreams stream for a while, the basic wire wrap loop, in my opinion, is one of the most useful things that you can learn. It's a very secure connection, and it's a connection that you can use in so many different ways. And I do need to throw a basic wire wrapping tutorial back up on the schedule because it's been a minute since we had one. So I might do that for next week or possibly the following week. But for now, this is your basic wire wrap loop. So I'm going to start with this pliers. This is my round nose pliers. These are the pliers that I use for making a round loop. You can see that the actual jaws of the pliers are conical. So they're rounded all the way around. And that's going to help me make a perfectly round loop. So I'm going to take my round nose pliers and I'm going to grab about 3/4 of an inch to an inch from the end of my wire. And I'm grabbing about 1/4 of an inch or so down from the end of my pliers. Since your pliers are tapered, the closer you grab to the tip, the smaller your loop's going to be. The closer you grab to the base, the bigger your loop is going to be. Now I'm going to take my non-plier hand, so I'm right-handed, this is my left hand, and I'm going to push my wire away from me over my pliers to make a 90-degree angle. Then I'm going to loosen my pliers, rotate them 1/8 of a turn, and grab. So what I've done now is I've rotated them up and I've grabbed right on that corner that I made. I'm going to pull back up over the top of my pliers and down. So see what I'm doing now is forming a loop around my pliers, but I can't finish my loop because this jaw of my pliers right here is in the way. So if I try and just swing this underneath, I'm going to wind up with this really weird bend here. So what I've got to do is just loosen my pliers again, rotate them out of the way, and then swing my wire underneath my pliers and away from me. So what I want at the end of that is this shape. This is called Our Lady with a Scarf. So I want a round loop that's centered over my stick, and I want a 90-degree angle between this piece of wire and this long piece of wire. Now I'm going to take my chain, one of my pieces, doesn't matter which one, and just slide that up my wire and pop that into my loop. So now I have my chain that is encompassed in my loop. And then I'm going to switch pliers. I'm going to grab my flat pliers, my chain nose, and I'm going to hold across my loop like so, and then I'm going to wrap. So I'm going to just take that short wire, wrap it around the long wire, starting right at the base of the loop, and I want to make sure that I wrap it nice and tight to my core wire, which is this long skinny wire, and I want to put my wraps very close together, like so. And then we're going to go ahead and trim. So you just need to get rid of that extra wire. Make sure you corral it with your finger, or it might, you know, go up your nose or something. And before you, I mean, you can laugh at that, but I do actually know somebody to which that happened. Thankfully, it wasn't me. And then when you have cut, you're going to have this little stabby bit of wire. You see that wire end right there? So I'm just going to take my chain nose and I'm just going to press that down so that it's kind of gone in with my coils. Now I'm going to string my 3 rose quartz beads onto this wire. If you have beads of different sizes, this project's going to work better for you if you have 2 that are one size and 1 that is the other size. And if you have, if you have beads of different sizes, what you want to do is put the small ones at the ends and the big one in the middle. These are all 3 the same size, so I don't need to worry about that. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a second basic wire wrap loop, but I need to allow space for my little herringbone wrapping that I'm about to do, which means that typically when we would be doing this, if we were just taking these rose quartz beads and linking them into the middle of a chain bracelet, I would place my round nose pliers for my second basic wire wrap loop right here so that they're touching the beads. But that gives me 0 room for that little, you know, pod that I'm trying to make around my beads. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this up, and it may seem a little bit exorbitant, but remember that this length here is actually going to wind up being divided evenly between the top and the bottom. So what I'm going to do is go up about 1/2 inch away from the beads. That'll give me 1/4 inch at the top and 1/4 inch at the bottom, which is going to give me a decent amount of that, you know, kind of pod wrapping. Now I'm going to once again make a basic wire wrap loop. So I'm going to take my left hand, push my wire away from me over my pliers to make a 90-degree angle, then loosen, rotate, grab, come back up over the top and down, loosen, rotate, grab, and then go underneath so that we have once again made a lady with a scarf. Grab my other piece of chain, find the end link of the chain and just bring it up and pop it into the loop. So when you're putting chain in the loop, just make sure that you're aware that there's only one direction it can go. So people tend to get confused. So I'm just following that long wire up and into the loop. But what people will do, especially beginners, is they'll try and go this way, and that does not work. So just remember, you just need to follow that long wire up and into your loop. And then I'm going to take my chain nose pliers, I'm going to hold across that loop, and I'm going to wrap. And I just want to match those wraps to these wraps, so it looks like I've got 2.5 on that side, so I'm just going to go ahead and do 2.5 on this side and trim. And once again, there's my stabby end. We're just going to make that swoosh down. There we go. So it's not sticking out. Now I'm going to grab my 22 gauge wire again, and I'm going to cut myself another piece. And this piece is going to be longer. I'm going to make this piece about 18 inches or so, which may be excessive, but maybe not. Anytime you're weaving or, you know, going around in circles or going around an object, it's really pretty consistent that it takes, unless you do this a lot and you've got a really good sense for how much wire this is going to take, tends to take more wire than you think it's going to. So I've got my 18-inch piece of 22 gauge wire, and I'm going to take my little pea pod that I'm working on here. And I'm gonna kind of eyeball where, okay, so where is that halfway point where my beads are centered on my wire, and I'm gonna say that's right here. So I'm just gonna mark that with my fingers, and then I'm gonna wrap my wire around at that spot. And if you find that it's difficult for you to wrap the 22 gauge wire around the 22 gauge wire, which is totally normal, you could jump down a gauge to something thinner. For this part of the project, you could do a 24 gauge instead of a 22 gauge. Now, you'll notice that there's this that's really unattractive. And the good news for me is I can just go ahead and cut that off. So we're gonna trim that off and just get rid of that ugly looking bit. And then here's the other cool thing is this is gonna slide a bit, so if I didn't get it perfectly positioned, I can just slide it into position now and then kind of hold it with my thumbnail. So now I'm gonna start that little pea pod. So I'm just gonna go around my beads and wrap right underneath them. I'm gonna go all the way around that core wire. So all the way around, make sure you keep it straight, so that now I'm going out the other side. And then I'm gonna go around the other side, like so, and then wrap it around again. So now I have one full frame around my beads. Now I'm just gonna keep repeating this. And so every time I do another pass with my wire, I'm gonna pull it, and it's gonna go outside of the wire that's already there, and then the wrap is gonna go underneath the wrap that's already there. And then up the other side, and wrap. And then we're just gonna keep going. So we're gonna go around the outside and wrap. And you're gonna find that this is gonna get easier because the more wraps you have stabilizing this wire, the easier it's gonna be to pull against it. So you're, as usual, your first couple wraps are gonna be the hardest, and that's pretty universal with most techniques, is the beginning is always the hardest, the middle is always the easiest, and then the end is sometimes a little tricky. It's kind of like the Hollywood trope of flying a plane. Flying a plane is easy. Landing a plane is hard. I've never actually flown a plane, so I cannot speak to the actual validity of that trope, but I can say I've seen it in a whole lot of movies. Okay, so I've filled up all my space. So I've filled up all the space between my beads and my actual loops. So I'm going to just take what remains of this wire and I'm going to wrap it around a couple times to anchor it. Now notice I cut 18 inches of wire. I'm only cutting off about 1.5 inches. So once again, it really does take more wire than you think. I'm going to trim that off, and then press down. Okay, so now what I have is I've got something I can accurately measure to figure out how long this needs to be. So 7-inch bracelet, my clasp is 3/4 of an inch, and my, well, how handy is that? My center section is 1.25 inches, so basically 2 inches, which means that of my total 7-inch bracelet length, 2 inches are things that are not chain, which means that 5 inches is going to be things that are chain, which means 2.5 inches on each side. So now I can go ahead and make that final cut at 2.5 inches. And oh dear, come back. Sorry, throwing tools at my breasts. It's super exciting. And these little bits you can save and you can use them for earrings or extenders or whatever. There's never, in my life, there's never a lack of need for tiny little chain snippets. And then I'm going to go ahead and attach my toggle. And so here's the thing about toggles that's kind of intimidating for people who don't buy them regularly. So a lot of times when you buy a toggle, it's going to be attached together with a jump ring like this, and it can be confusing because you're like, well, how does that work? It's attached. Is it supposed to be attached? Why is it attached? And yeah, the only reason that it's attached is so that the pieces of your toggle don't go astray from each other before they're sold. So you will remove this jump ring before use, but it's usually a pretty good sturdy jump ring, so I like to reuse it to actually attach my toggle to my piece. So I'm just going to hold my jump ring by the opening is right there, and then just lever that open. I'm going to take one of my pieces off, leave the other piece on the jump ring, and then grab my chain, attach that to the end of the chain, and then close it. Now when you're closing it, having 2 pairs of pliers, 2 pairs of chain nose is best. I don't have another chain nose by me, so I'm going to grab a round nose. What you want to make sure that you do when you're closing your jump ring is you want to make sure that you close it until you feel the 2 ends of the jump ring scraping against each other. You want to make sure that there's no space between those 2 sides, that if you hold it up to the light, you can't see any light in between. That's going to lead to a jump ring that's going to be sturdy and is going to last. Jump rings tend to get a bad name just because a lot of times people don't close them well enough, and so then of course they come open. I'm going to attach my second side of my clasp to my bracelet. For that, I'm going to use another jump ring. So I just have a 4mm 20 gauge jump ring here, and I'm going to go ahead and open that up and attach my clasp to that, attach my chain, and then close it up. Make sure it's closed nice and tight. And then the last thing I'm going to do is, so my little pea pod has a top and a bottom. The top is where the wires are more smooth, the bottom is where you can kind of see all the loops. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it, I'm going to put it with the top facing away from me. I'm going to take my 2 thumbs and my 2 index fingers, and I'm just going to press to give it a little bit of a curve. And what that's going to do is that's just going to make it sit nicely against our wrist. If we leave it straight, it's going to be a little awkward on the top of our wrist. And that's it. That's our Peas in a Pod bracelet. So very simple, easy. Get back into the swing of things lunchtime project. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us on the Beading Dreams noon stream on this Thursday. I'm Allison from Beading Dreams in Dallas, Texas. We have been on semi-hiatus for a couple weeks, but we are back with our regular streaming schedule. So that means you can find us on this channel when twitch.tv/Beading Dream, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday at 6 p.m. Central Time, Thursdays also at noon, and live merchandise sales every Wednesday and Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Tonight we will be doing a torch class because it's Torch Thursday. I'll be doing a fairly simple braided and soldered ring. Very excited. I may embellish that project a little bit on stream, depends on how feisty I'm feeling this evening. So you can catch me back on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream tonight at 6 p.m. with that braided soldered ring. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me during lunchtime, and I will look forward to seeing you all very soon. Bye.